The book itself poses a choice, a stark choice at the very outset in the introduction and overview. Option A and option B are referred to throughout and it can be expressed in a variety of ways. I start my expression of option A and option B that we face as a species by quoting Martin Luther King Jr. We must learn to live together as brothers or we will perish together as fools. So option A, learn to live together as human beings. Option B, perish together as fools. And the book says right at the outset, I prefer option A. One of the problems, the reason that the pathology that I'm going to talk about continues is because somehow we always think that the evil, the bad things, the pathology that we're inflicting on ourselves as human beings is coming from bad people. It's the communists, the fascists, the terrorists. It's Saddam Hussein, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin. Or if it's not one of those, then it's our political leaders who could do, if only we had better political leaders, then things would go better. However, many authors, this just happens to be a popular author who's pointed out that by far the greater part of violence that humans have inflicted on each other is not the work of criminals or the mentally deranged, or for that matter of evil people somewhere, but of normal, respectable citizens in the service of the collective ego. So you think about Adolf Hitler, but there were the good citizens of Germany that supported that war effort. And all of the things that went on in Germany in the 1930s and the early 1940s. And in our society, much the same thing. So we'll get into that just a little bit. This is, of course, from Eckhart Tolle, his book, A New Earth, Awakening to Your Life Purpose. So he says one can go so far as to say that on this planet, normal equals insane. So that means that we have to look at ourselves in terms of where all this problem is coming from. So the book itself has 30 principles and other ways of organizing this. I'm actually, when I write the book, it's much more entertaining than a textbook of medicine. But I have the paradigm of a textbook of medicine in mind. So I have 30 principles. And here are examples of some of the basic principles. We cannot be part of the solution until we understand that we're part of the problem. That goes for individuals and it goes for governments. Warfare is pathologic. That shouldn't be difficult to understand. It's intuitively obvious that warfare is pathologic. Militant nationalism, which is the standard way of thinking about international affairs, drives the global community down the road to ruin, and we're headed down that road as far as I can tell. That's what the evidence indicates to me. And that's option B as the book expresses it. Power must be constrained by law, but if the most powerful states refuse to abide by the law, then we have a major problem as a species on this planet. Democracy and law are interdependent, so that means that by definition in a democracy, what the government does is ultimately the responsibility of the citizens of the state. That means you and me. Other principles in the book: civil society has emerged as the option A leader in world affairs, not governments. Civil society. Problems are there to be solved. Identifying and solving problems is essential to personal growth. So we see all these problems about why we can't head in a healthier direction. Well, define the problem, break the problem down into smaller parts, try to envision solutions to the problem and get to work. The conditions of human existence and the chances of human survival depend largely on respect for yourself and others. Emotional intelligence is essential at both the personal and the global level. Optimism is essential. Complacency is dangerous. Pessimism is a waste of time. Okay, so this is an illustration, one of the illustrations of the pathology. This is a picture of Hiroshima after it was struck by an atomic bomb in 1945. So, of course, in that case, the government that was responsible for the destructive act was the United States government, but this is obviously not a problem unique to the government of the United States. This is a problem of our species human beings. So if you were, just do a thought experiment, step back from the planet, imagine that you're looking down on a planet and you're seeing a species that will do this kind of thing to each other. This is not just about the government of the United States, although I use a lot of examples from the government of the United States. So we've been inflicting horrific pathology on ourselves. And then, in your thought experiment, ask how long you think that species is going to survive with accumulating challenges in the 21st century. It's an interesting question. So Jonathan Schell, who's written a number of important books, a very well-known author, this is from his book, The Unconquerable World, Power, Nonviolence, and the Will of the People, makes, again, an important point about a choice. 58 years after Hiroshima, the world has to decide whether to continue on the path of cataclysmic violence charted in the 20th century and now resumed in the 21st, or whether to embark on a new and cooperative political path. It's a decision composed of innumerable smaller decisions, I have that in bold for a reason, guided by a common theme, which is weaning politics off violence. Now, the innumerable smaller decisions, what are you doing tomorrow? And what might you do in the course of the next month or the next year to move our species towards a healthier pathway and a more functional global community? And that's going to be just countless choices of people like you and me. That's the innumerable smaller decisions. Now, just to emphasize, this is not just about the United States government, although that's, since they have been considered a superpower, they're an excellent choice as a prototype. But I was talking to the mayor of Hiroshima some years ago. He was in Calgary to receive the Calgary Peace Prize. And he called to my attention the Japanese bombing of Chongqing, which occurred, was actually a series of air raids between 1939 and 1942. And the panic that ensued after one of these raids led to these civilian casualties that you see. And in the mayor of Hiroshima's view, he was receiving the Peace Prize because of his leadership for Mayors for Peace. And he said that in his view that the bombing that the Japanese did in China in that era was the beginning of the road that led to the atomic bomb attack on Hiroshima. So here's Alexander Solzhenitsyn. This kind of observation comes from many, many sources. So Solzhenitsyn says, if only it were all so simple, if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, terrorists, whatever, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being, and who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? So if you want another authoritative source, Walt Kelly, if some of you know the comic strip Pogo. So the quote, "We have met the enemy and he is us." That's from Pogo. And lots of others have made that observation. So the pathology continued. This is from The Highway of Death, an Iraqi convoy fleeing Kuwait during the 1991 Gulf War. It was bombed at the front end and the back end and everything in between. These vehicles were trying to escape what was coming onto them from the sky. I'll spare you the pictures of the remains of the human beings that were in those vehicles. So it was like shooting fish in a barrel, said one of the pilots who participated in this exercise. So again, what human beings do to human beings. This is, and again, citizens thinking that they're doing something good or patriotic. Somebody had to make the planes, somebody had to make the bombs, somebody paid the taxes. I pay taxes to the United States government to pay for all this. So we've been squandering our resources on producing the means of our destruction. The pathology continued. This is more recently still, 1999, January, an air-to-surface missile attack, an AGM-130 missile made by the Boeing Corporation. Bill Clinton was president at the time. It was an attack on Iraqi territory. It hit a neighborhood, and the body of this 6-year-old girl is being exhumed after the raid. So we are relinquishing life-affirming alternatives that we can scarcely even imagine in the current dysfunctional state of the global community. What would that child have become if she had lived? That is not a question that Bill Clinton or anyone in his administration or the people dropping the bombs or flying the planes is competent to answer. They are not competent to answer the question, what's the value of the life of that child? The pathology continued. This is, I believe, from the Army Times. Suicides among veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts are soaring. So according to this report, about 30 veterans a day try to commit suicide and about 18 succeed. So the pathology that we're inflicting on ourselves includes actually personal infliction of pathology on ourselves. What would have been the value of the life of those people who have committed suicide after they've been through this form of pathology and militant nationalism, if they had been part of a healthier global community that you and I can help to create? The pathology continued. Militant nationalism is intentionally cultivated. This is U.S. propaganda for war in the 1990s. Three of them directed at war against Iraq, one of them the NATO bombing of the former Yugoslavia. And if you look at the international law on the subject, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 20, Paragraph 1, any propaganda for war shall be prohibited by law. It was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1966, signed and ratified by the United States government and the government of Canada, and ignored. The pathology continued back to 1938, the Anschluss with Austria, Germany's Anschluss with... Look at the enthusiasm about the future on the faces of those young Austrian women, about what the future holds. 1938. Remember, Germany had accumulated more points than any other country in the Olympics of 1936. The trains were running on time. They had in the early 1930s 40% unemployment. There was close to full employment. There was pride in the country, all kinds of reasons to be delighted that there was this connection, reunification between Austria and Germany in 1938. The next 7 years brought some surprises for people who were so enthusiastic about militant nationalism. So here's the paradox, and I want to emphasize that this paradox pertains to wartime like World War II, when there's really, everybody is engaged. If you're a young man the age of 20 or 25 or so, you're very likely to be going overseas or being involved in the military services, and wherever you are, whatever you're doing, in some way or another, you're likely to be involved in the war effort. So during World War II, does not pertain to the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm not talking about, when I use the word wartime, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a different era, and you'll see some statistics that emphasize this. So during World War II, while citizens were providing the necessary support system for inflicting lethal destruction on human beings in other countries, they vastly enhanced their support of each other, leading to many positive outcomes, including a greater than usual increase in life expectancy among the civilian population in the UK, 1940-1950. So here's the data for if you look just across, so the decades of the 20th century for men and women, how many years life increase was there in life expectancy? So I'm not sure exactly what the life expectancy was in 1900, but let's say for the sake of discussion that it was 47 years. So by the end of that decade, life expectancy was about 51 years. So there had been a 4-year increase in life expectancy within a decade. The very next decade, it jumped to by more than 6 years, and that was the decade of World War I. Then it drops to a little over 2 years. Then 1930 to 1940, it's just a little over 1 year. And then in the era of World War II, the life expectancy among the civilian population increases by 6 to 7 years. And that figure is not matched by any of the subsequent decades, a huge increase in life expectancy. Among the civilian population, you have to factor out the people who are dying on the battlefront, of course.